we are going to focus this session entirely, I think, on the threats that are emerging or have emerged to the media, whether in India or Pakistan. I'd like to divide these threats into two distinct categories. One category of threats deal with the external threats, which is the threats that come from people and players outside the media, whether it be the establishment essentially. And I think we see a lot of that in Pakistan. In India, I think the threat is very much internal, from proprietors and from editors who won't stand up, to proprietors who are only too willing to sell out. So we have this phenomenon of refugee journalists in India, that a heck of a lot have dropped out of the mainstream media and are trying to figure out what to do. I am myself included. He's just about hanging in there, I think. So let me begin by asking Cyril about the kind of conditions that he specifically works under, and conditions in general, essentially on the kind of things that you have to deal with from the government, from the army, and any other religious players in Pakistan.
So after Hamid got hit, his channel, which is Jio and Jung Group, which is the largest media house in Pakistan, accused the ISI chief in Pakistan of orchestrating the hit on Hamid. And that led to a cataclysm in the media in the country, because the ISI hit back, tried to shut Jio down. Most of the other news channels jumped on board against Jio because they saw an opportunity to take down the #1 channel in the country. And Jio was by and far the largest news channel in the country at the time. So it's been a rough 7, 8, 9, 10 months. The state has never intervened as directly before, at least perhaps not since the time of General Zia. And by the state, I mean specifically the army-led security establishment. But what that did was it also opened the door for the political government. And ever since, in response, the PMLN has now been sort of putting pressure on various channel owners and main frontline anchors, etc., to try and toe a particular kind of line. So this is the cleavage within Pakistan right now. It's essentially PMLN, Nawaz Sharif's government, versus, in a soft way, the military establishment. But in addition to that, the long-running threat has been from militant groups inside Pakistan. And you would think that sort of militant groups would be indifferent to certain kinds of coverage on TV because they're out there, and as you probably keep hearing about, a number of blasts and attacks happening in the country. But there's acute pressure, and a number of my friends are personally under threat. They've gone from being able to travel around freely to now having armored SUVs and requiring 24-hour security, because within the militant landscape, there are so many of these groups, there's so many entities. Some are sectarians, some are internationalists, some are locals, some are Masouds from Fatah. And on any given day, you don't know who you might annoy or who might get annoyed with you. And you're very, very vulnerable, especially because most of our media is headquartered in Karachi, which is our largest city, and it's a tumultuous city. So yeah, it's a tough environment in Pakistan, but I think this year has been particularly cataclysmic.
I think unlike Pakistan, the one threat that we don't have, thankfully, is a death threat. I don't think we do our journalism under the shadow of the gun. Not even in Kashmir. I was in Kashmir through much of last week, and to be fair, whatever else happens in Kashmir, by and large, journalists are relatively safe. Militants, yes, there have been over the years a couple of examples. Zafar Miraj, a Srinagar journalist, was shot at and very badly injured. He's now contesting the elections almost a decade ago. But by and large in India, the death threat hasn't existed against journalists. Even though I'm sure several politicians would like to eliminate us. I had the experience only 2 weeks ago of Mamata Banerjee walking out on my program and shouting in a banshee-like manner. But she eventually came back and completed the interview. I said that if you don't come back, then I will show this walkout on TV. So it seemed to work. because she came and sat down like a quiet little girl for the rest of the interview. But unfortunately, there was a Telegraph reporter who was in the room next door, and the next day the Telegraph, which is Calcutta's leading paper, had an 8-column front page headline: Mamta walks out, throws mic, even uttering the various Bengali abuses that she gave me during that period. But by and large, the threat doesn't exist in terms of life. I think the threat that exists at the moment is, to my mind, typified by what I thought summer was one of the images of this year. Narendra Modi had a Diwali Milan. I think last month, in October was Diwali. He invited several journalists and editors for it. And journalists and editors were so excited that they were going to meet the Prime Minister 5 months after he had become Prime Minister for the first time almost, that instead of asking him questions, every journalist and every editor was tripping over each other to take a selfie with Narendra Modi. And Narendra Modi was very happy to take those selfies also. He was smiling away, journalists were smiling away. As a result, in that entire 1.5 hour interaction, no one asked him questions. Mr. Modi came, gave some 3-line thing on Swachh Bharat, praised the journalists, thank you for your cooperating with me on Swachh Bharat. The journalists were so happy that the Prime Minister of the country was praising them and was wanting to take selfies with them, that they forgot that their basic task as journalists is to ask him questions. And therefore, I think the real threat is that we are moving towards what I call as embedded media. From independent media, we are moving to an era of embedded media. If you are part of the embedded media, you will get certain benefits. If you are not part of the embedded media, you won't get those benefits. Mr. Modi, in his 12 years in Gujarat, did not address one press conference, did not take questions from journalists. He has been Prime Minister of India for the last almost 7 months. Not a single press conference where he has taken questions. So I think the threat is in terms of journalists themselves and their proprietors, because proprietors today have interests that go beyond a newspaper. Most proprietors today either have a power plant, or they have set up, or they've brought mining companies, or they have other businesses which have less and less to do with news. As a result, the conflicts of interest take place at a very direct level. The political leadership is aware of those conflicts of interest, and the journalist, in a sense, is caught in between. So I think the threats that exist are A, because of pattern of ownership, B, because the nature of relationship between the politician and the journalist has changed, and C, I think that there is a general, what I call a moral compass of journalists, where we have lost what we are supposed to be. I think our basic task is to ask questions. And I thought the role of journalists was to challenge the establishment, was to question the establishment. But sadly, we have almost resorted to a form of self-censorship and what I call selfie journalism now, wherein we almost take pride that we have got a selfie with the Prime Minister. So I think the threat lies within in this country. It doesn't lie as much outside. And that actually makes it more difficult, because I think Cyril knows who his enemy is. I am sometimes unaware of who my enemy is, because the enemy could be the person sitting in the newsroom next to me, who may be an embedded journalist, and will go and tell the Prime Minister of India tomorrow, "Arey, wo Rajdeep Sardesai hai, wo aapke baare mein ye keh raha tha." And that is my fear today, that there are people within newsrooms, in organizations, who have become part of this embedded journalism, and therefore there is no place which is safe anymore. Even the newsroom is not safe. Because I am convinced there are people in newsrooms across this country who have struck their own private deals with whoever is in the establishment, and part of their link to that establishment is how do I distance myself from these anti-establishment journalists. So I actually think that journalists in Pakistan have been far braver than journalists in India in the last 10 years. They have braved guns, they have braved censorship, they have braved all kinds of hostile forces. In India, on the other hand, we have succumbed in the last 10 years. I have never seen in 26 years of journalism such a weak and timid media of the kind that we have today. We have become weak, we have become timid, we treat our politicians almost like deities. I don't know whether it is true in Goa also, but I was told that when Mr. Parrikar was here, it wasn't easy to criticize Mr. Parrikar. And that's why someone once told me Parrikar is Chota Modi. I don't know whether that is true or not, but many journalists used to tell me this.
In fact, just going to refer to that and to reaffirm the point that I think journalists in Pakistan have definitely been far more courageous than we have been in India over the last few years. And yes, we should give them a hand for that.
I think at the end of the day, it's a job, and you're in this profession, you choose it voluntarily, you're passionate about writing or being on TV, questioning people, asking, having a viewership or a readership and trying to respond to them. Like, for example, this 25 rupees a day that my newspaper costs, newspapers in Pakistan are far more expensive than over here. And so there's somebody who's paying that money, and you sort of have some kind of, if not a debt to them, but some kind of responsibility towards them. But I think there are far more prosaic answers to that too. And if you look at Pakistan's political history, it's always been tumultuous. It's always been standoffish, right? We've had eras of military governments every 10 years or so, and the establishment and the journalists have to push back against each other constantly. So that ebb and flow that you've seen over the years has kind of hardened journalists. Unfortunately, one of the things Mr. Aziz was just talking about, Pakistan is roughly, in my opinion, about 5 years behind the Indian journalistic cycle or curve. And many of the things that you're seeing and what Rajiv was talking about right now are sadly happening in Pakistan too. Because most of the new entrants to the media in Pakistan, until 2002, we had one state-owned TV channel called Pakistan Television. Now we have 20+ news channels. And all of the new entrants into this are people who come from business backgrounds, not from journalistic backgrounds. And many of the experiences that I've read about and heard about with Rajdeep and others in India are now happening in Pakistan itself, where an owner will call up an anchor and tell him, you can't talk about this. Or a number of my friends have had to quit their channels because in Pakistan you might think it's just the military establishment, but it's often the political parties themselves. The PMLN is particularly strong on the media. It doesn't like criticism, and it pushes back. So what they do is essentially, well, if you dominate Punjab and most of the media comes from there, you know the owners personally, their contracts, their jobs, their businesses are all tied to it. So sort of the commercialization of media that I think seems to have been very apparent over here for a number of years is now becoming apparent in Pakistan, in addition to all the other problems you already have.
The root of the problem in India is the cost of newspapers. How much do they cost? How much does the Dawn cost?
20 rupees a day and 25 on Sunday.
Would any of you pay 20 rupees a day and 25 on Sunday? The point is, what's happened in India is that the business model of newspapers, especially newspapers, is broken. Because when I was working in a newspaper, that was about 5 or 6 years ago, and I'd asked for the figures, it cost about 8 rupees 40 paise to produce the newspaper, which was then being sold for 2 rupees or 1 rupee in some cities. So this is the problem. If you fall into this kind of a cycle where you are completely beholden to advertising, then you ebb and flow with the advertising market. There is very little, and your independence gets eviscerated as the market grows and falls, and as economic growth wanes and waxes.